Hi everyone, we would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are creating and streaming from today, and we would also like to pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging. With me today is Ian Haigh. Hi Ian, how are you?
Hey Flynn, I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me back on Adobe Live. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, and looking forward to geeking out with you today. So we're going to be playing around with After Effects. There's a couple of new things that I've seen a lot on Twitter, and as someone who doesn't spend a lot of time in After Effects, I'm really keen to get your thoughts and insights into that. But let's kick off by maybe telling people a little bit more about you. So Ian Haigh from Ketchup Partners. So can you tell us a little bit about Ketchup Partners and I don't know, one fun fact? There you go. I'm putting you on the spot. One fun fact.
Okay, well, I'll save the fun fact for the end because I've yet to think of it. But Ketchup Partners is basically my little company. It's just me by myself. I put the partners in there to make it sound bigger than it really is.
It's bigger, right?
It's just me.
Yeah.
And
you can charge agency fees for that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And this is a website. I'll just hit refresh so you can see. So a lot of it is a little bit of filming and editing and script writing and animation. So there's motion graphics. So there's loads of different stuff. Worked with a bunch of clients over the years in different kinds of categories. So you can see things in there from Qantas and Spotify, Chris Doyle in there, friend of ours. There's some Telstra, there's all sorts of different bits and bobs in there. So these are all projects that I've worked on over the last little while. It's super fun. There's a lot of variety, and I think it really suits me because I get to do a bit of everything, which is very much my kind of thing. And the fun fact would be that Ketchup, I just made that name up because I was probably hungry, and I post-rationalized it afterwards. And the tagline is "Everything is better with ketchup."
Oh, beautiful! It's like don't go shopping, to the supermarket on a full stomach. And it's like don't come up with brand names on an empty stomach, I should say. But I think it works well, and because you're Kiwi as well, you're going to get the ketchup, which is just a little bit nicer.
Yeah, exactly. It's a delicious name.
That's very good. Well, thanks. So we have a live chat today as well. Hey, Gareth in chat, Johanna as well. So we're keeping an eye on the live chat here on Behance. So if you're watching live, let us know if you have any questions as we're rolling through. If you're a bit of a novice when it comes to After Effects, don't be afraid to ask questions like I am. So I'll be asking some of those questions. But also if you're a veteran and there's some questions, Ian knows his way around the After Effects campus. So just throw them in chat if you've got them. And if you're on YouTube as well, you can throw your questions in too, and we'll do our best to keep an eye on there. So, Ian.
100%. Yeah, exactly. Questions, just jump in at any time. So today's session is a little bit more kind of advanced than some of the other ones that we've done together. And we're going to be jumping into a little bit of code. I'm going to try and keep it nice and light and not too heavy duty because code can be a little bit intimidating. Mm-hmm. But once you wrap your head around what code can do in After Effects, you don't need to know a lot to get a lot of use out of it. And I think I've got a couple of examples in here which will actually make it really clear just how advantageous it can be to sprinkle a little bit of JavaScript onto your layers. So this is the kind of thing that we're going to be looking at today. This is a simple example. So it's just an animation using some shape layers.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and they're kind of all offset, just offset in time a little bit, and they're all rotating and scaling and fading, and there are no keyframes in this animation. So the whole thing is just we set up some expressions on the layers, and then basically offset the layers. So you can offset them manually, which could be really tedious. You can use a plugin called Rift, which I love, or the hot new thing in After Effects land is called Skew. And I'd love to sort of show you a few of the bits and pieces that you can do with Skew, because it really is kind of amazing. And it's generated a lot of buzz. It's easy to see why, because it's brilliant.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about. So before Twitter started melting, that was the main thing my timeline was telling me to check out, which was a lot of creatives in motion talking about Skew. And I already follow the person who created it, because I think he's created quite a few other plugins that are really popular. So
Yeah, yeah.
although I don't jump into it. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right.
Yeah.
So, and this was the new one, and people losing their mind over it. So, all right. Well, without further ado, let's get stuck into it.
Yeah, cool. All right, so we'll do this entirely from scratch. So I'm in Adobe Illustrator. Oh, and also we're going to use another amazing plugin, which if you haven't kicked the tires with yet, called Overlord, and that's incredible as well. So we'll just get started in Adobe Illustrator, and we're going to bring our assets from Illustrator into After Effects using Overlord. So cool. I've just got a blank document here, and I'm going to use the curvature tool. So that's shift back tick, and that just sort of lets you just go click, 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 and it automatically figures out how to make it sort of curve beautifully. So it's super easy to just get a nice organic looking shape. You can pick those up and move it around. You can see that it's adjusting the curves for me.
Right.
So it's just, I mean, if you ever sort of struggled getting a nice smooth curve with the Bezier tool, this is like a breath of fresh air. It's just so much easier. So once I've got a shape that sort of looks quite cool-ish, now I'll just make another little shape in the middle. So I'll just start making a new one in here. I'll just something like that, more or less a circle. And now I'll just blend those together. So I'm just going to grab one point on one of the curves, and then I will shift click to select one other point on that curve. And then I'm going to go to the object menu and go down to blend and hit make. So far, so unimpressive. It's only put one in the middle. So I'll go down to blend again and choose blend options. And now I can choose specified steps. And with preview on, I can use my keyboard to go up and down. I can start putting in more clones, or even shift, and then it'll jump 10 at a time.
Oh, I didn't realize you could do that with shift. Okay.
Yeah. So shift will jump at like 10 steps at a time, or you can just go up and down to do one step at a time. So if we use, say, 20 clones, and these are live, these curves are still live. So if I went in here with my, selected that tool just with my, the direct selection tool, which is A on the keyboard, I could get my curvature tool out and start moving it around. You can see that it will actually update in real time. So you can fine tune however you like. You can do that on the outside one as well. So it kind of get the cool sort of effect that you're looking for. It's looking pretty rad. Scale it all down a little bit, and then we could say
that's great. I like it when you don't have to be too precious about doing something right at the beginning. So you can just kind of do it really, really quickly, do the inside one, and then play around until it feels right. You don't have to go back to the first step.
Yeah,
redo it and all that sort of stuff. Nice organic way to kind of create.
Yeah, you really feel like you're kind of you can just have some fun instead of like getting too persnickety. You can even rotate one of these curves and sort of see how that affects it as well, or rotate the middle one. So there's the number of different ways you can sort of play around and get the look that you're going for. The other thing that you could do at this stage as well, we haven't even gone into After Effects yet, is I could change. Right now both of those have got a fill on them, so I could just get rid of the fill, and then I could say change the color of one of these. So I could say maybe we'll go from I inadvertently changed both of those curves. So if I just select one curve and I'll change that one to say white, now you can see that it's going from white in the middle.
Right.
So there's a bunch of different, you could play around with maybe, I don't know, like something ghastly like that. All right, so here we go. We're sort of going from, we'll go from like a light greenish color in the middle, excuse me, to something like a bit. There we go. So there's our setup. This is still in blend mode. We need to make them into individual elements. What I like to do is just kind of keep that one live somewhere. So I'll just make a little clone of that, chuck that on the pasteboard, select my blend again, go up to the object menu, and now I'm going to go expand. And it's just made those into individual little lines. It's all grouped, but you can see that now they're all separate paths.
Right, and they remain as lines. They're not shapes yet, right? Like it's still
That's
line.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so these are just like if you Bezier curves, just a standard Bezier curve in Illustrator. But they're no longer, so if I change the color of the center one, for example, it doesn't get reflected because it's no longer part of that blend element.
Cool.
If this is if we're sort of happy with that, I'm going to go into After Effects now. This is the one that I was working on before. I'll make a brand new comp and I'll call it green shape thing. And now with my, I'm going to use the Overlord plugin. So this is the one that I was talking about before. So you don't need to use the Overlord plugin. You could also bring that Illustrator file directly into After Effects. But the nice thing about doing it like this is that there's I think that the website talks about opening a mystical portal between Illustrator and After Effects. And once you've kind of got the vibe of it, it is just such a nice way to work, because all I have to do is click on that and it'll just replicate that in After Effects. No hassle.
Right. It looked like you were in Illustrator when you did that. So is this a plugin for Illustrator or a plugin for After Effects?
Great question, Flynn. It's a plugin for both.
Both.
You've got an extension in up here in After Effects, so I can push things from After Effects to Illustrator or pull things from Illustrator into After Effects, and it's also got a panel in a floating palette in Illustrator as well, so I can push it into After Effects that way too.
Cool.
So what I did before is I just clicked that button, push selection to AE, pushed it in there. It came in as one layer. And then if I flipped that open, I can see it's actually got all of the different paths inside, which might be what you want, but it's not what we want. So I'm just going to delete that. This time, I'll hold down the Option key or Alt on Windows. And when I press it in, it'll make a separate layer for each element. It's brought them all in individually.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. So the other thing, I know this is so embarrassing, I've forgotten his name. What's the name of the After Effects tutorial YouTube king that you've had on the show?
Are you thinking Ben Marriott?
Ben Marriott.
Right.
He's amazing. And one thing that he makes a point of saying, name your layers. So I don't want to get in trouble with Ben, so I'm going to name my layers. What I can do is actually, what I did before was when I put it into, they just came through just called layer 1, layer 2, layer 3. If I give the Illustrator layer a name, green squiggle, and then I use Overlord, holding down the Option key again, they'll all get that name from the Illustrator layer. So it's a nice little shortcut if you are going to be diligent and name your layers, which, like Ben Marriott says, you should always do. Now, we've got our little green squiggles in here, which is fabulous. I'm really digging these. Now here comes the animation part. And the first thing I'll do is let's figure out how we will get these to fade in. And then once that's happening, we'll use Skew to offset the fade, and you can start to see how it's going to come together. So I'm just going to give ourselves a little bit more space. We'll push that up. If I flip open the greens, one of these, just any of these, you can see all of these properties down here. Now I'm going to assume that if you're watching that you already have a bit of After Effects experience, so I won't go into all of the details and so on. But suffice to say that if I press the T key, T for opacity or transparency, if that helps you remember it.
T for opacity, yeah.
Perfect. T. Then I can see, all right, so now it's only going to show me that property. There's the little stopwatch that turns on animation for that layer. If I hold down the Alt key, or again, it's the Option key on the Mac, and click that stopwatch, it'll put an expression on there. So you can see that number turns red, and it puts a little bit of JavaScript code into this box. Now, here's the coding part. This is where we start to have some fun with it. What we need to do is we need to get it to change the value of this property based on the time. So the time is where the playhead is at any 1 second. So for example, right now the playhead is at 1, so the value of time would be 1. And over here, if I move it up to 9, the value of time would be 9 seconds. The way that we'll do that in its most simplest form, you've got a little pop-up menu here that shows you all of the different terms that you can use when creating expressions. So that's fantastic for jogging your memory when you can't remember what you're supposed to be doing. We want to go to interpolation, and we'll just choose right now linear. It's given you the values here that you need to fill in. So linear is the word that is going to generate the values for us. These are all different variables that we need to tell linear to work with. I've made a little bit of an Illustrator doc over here.
Oh, cool. Little cheat sheet.
Little cheat sheet, if you like. So this one I'm using ease. It's more or less the same kind of thing, but it puts a curve in. We'll get to that. So in this, for our purposes, we're going to use t, the first variable, to refer to the time. That's the one that changes in from frame to frame. That's the one that is going to like change and then spit out a different number. This one we're going to use like when to begin our easing or the changing of the variable. T max is the one that we'll call, that's when it's going to end. And then the value at the beginning and the value at the end. So it'll become clear once I sort of put it in there. I'm just going to solo this layer so that we can't see everything else. So that's using this button there so that it's basically hidden everything. Might just make that line a little bit thicker as well so that we can see properly what's going on. And now using that linear keyword, I'm going to pop up that menu. I'm going to choose interpolation. I'll choose the second one in here. It's automatically put everything in there for us, but now we need to tell it what we want to do. So what we want to do is we're going to use the time. That's the one that will vary as the playhead goes through our animation. So the minimum, we'll say we want it to start at 0. And say we want to finish at 2 seconds. And so at 0 seconds, we want the value to be 0. And then value 2 is 100. So what this means is between the times of 0 and 2, 0 here on the timeline and 2 here on the timeline, I want you to begin at 0 and I want you to finish at 100. So it looks like nothing's happened, but if I move my playhead now, it will, and I'll just run a preview for you, it will fade in over 2 seconds.
Right.
And if I step through, just dragging, if you keep your eye over here on the opacity value, as I drag that up, it's automatically changing through 0 to 100 over 2 seconds. So at 1 second and 24 frames, it's 98%. If I go forward one more frame, it's exactly 100%. So it's working. It works. The way to get that onto all of the other layers, we'll make them all a little bit, 3 points each. If I go to the opacity, all I need to do is click that property, hit Command C for copy, Control C on Windows. And now if I go paste on all of those layers, all of them have that expression that we just wrote. So it's kind of, you don't have to write it out for every single layer.
Right.
That would be bad. Now
that would take a long time.
It would take a long time, and we don't have that much time. So we're going to do it the clever way, and we just copied that one. So just again, all I did was T to expose that property. I'm just going to select it, Command C, going to select all, I'm going to paste. And now when I play it back, they all fade in over 2 seconds.
Nice.
So that's all well and good. You're thinking, oh, that's great, but I could just put keyframes in there. And you're right, but it's going to get even more powerful. So the next thing we want to look at is how you use Skew to then offset these layers and start to get some more interesting effects. So Skew is a commercial plugin. There is a a trial period where you can get to play around with it and see if it's for you. I did not take very long to play around with it and realize that it was for me, because it's amazing. Just make this a little bit shorter. And this is the Skew panel up here. And as you can see, it's kind of it replicates your timeline in its own panel. And the reason it's done that is it gives you more ways to move your, to offset your layers, if you like. So I can just drag and select those layers. And then when I start dragging it at the bottom or the top, it won't do it first time because this is a live demo and nothing works first time. I can offset them like that visually. Cool. You can see really easily how far it's offset. And if I start to move up, you can see I can even give it a little bit of a wiggle like that.
A little bit of a wiggle.
Yes, a bit of a wiggle. And you can get even more kind of sophisticated. So if I were to, once I've done that skew, it pops up this little menu down here where I can then click and actually give these a curve, like an easing curve. So, and you can see every time I click something, it automatically updates in the actual After Effects timeline as well. So you can get some pretty amazing sort of effects with very little effort. Now, I can tell you right now that one of the problems that we're about to encounter is that when I typed in my little expression, it worked for the first layer, but now all of the other layers are just kind of appearing. So where did the fading go? And that's because if I go back to the expression,
is it because it was to the second specifically, and then we've moved it further away from that second?
That's exactly right. You get a point or certificate for that answer. So we said we hard coded in here 0 seconds to 2 seconds. And then by offsetting the layers, well, that's no longer at 0 seconds. That's sort of at like half a second.
I knew it.
That's it. You're ahead of the curve. So this is another little picture that I've made. So
I love these diagrams, by the way. I hope these are helpful, everyone, because they're really useful for me. Because obviously sometimes when we're streaming in After Effects, depending on what screen you're looking at as well, it can be quite hard to see the detail. So this is very cool. I appreciate it.
Some of the concepts, if you're not familiar with it, then it can be a little bit difficult to wrap your head around. So hopefully, like you say, hopefully having a bit of a visual kind of aid will help to grasp what I'm banging on about. So this is my simplified After Effects timeline. And you can see here that the layer begins at 1 second and it ends at 6 seconds. Now, if I turn on my little, we're going to call this in the expression is called the in point. And this is called the out point. So that's what we'll refer to in our code. So what we'll do is we'll start our easing at the in point, and then we'll finish it at in point plus 1. So that will mean that the fading in will take place from here to here, no matter where the layer is on the timeline, because it will be it's no longer sort of an absolute value, it's a relative value. It's relative to the layer itself.
Cool. That makes sense. I like it.
I'll just try that out real quick. So instead of saying like pavement 0 and 2, we'll start here like in point. After Effects is helpfully trying to guess what I mean. So in point, and then in point plus, we'll use 2 seconds again, like we did before. Do that, okay. So the time is the bit that changes. The in point is the start, is where the layer starts. In point plus 2 is 2 seconds after where the layer starts. And we want it to go from 0 to 100. So I'm going to do the same little trick as I did before. Copy that property, select all, hit paste. And now we should see immediately when I hit paste, you can see, just get rid of the, that's before and that's after. So you can see that it's actually properly fading now. So if I press, if I render that one, you can see that they are, in fact, fading in. You know what? Just need to speed that up a little bit using Skew because it's taking too long. So here's another little trick on Skew. If you hit the tab key, it lets you select, it toggles between selecting the entire layer or just the in and out points of the layer. So in this instance, I just want to change the in points. I've hit tab and I can drag over those, and then I can just scale them all real quick up here. So we'll go from there to there is only 2 seconds. So if I hit play now, you can see that it's
So you wanted the animation to start happening a bit quicker, a bit sooner. There was too much of not enough happening.
Exactly, and I know people are hungry for content, so I thought we better get.
You've got 3 seconds. Isn't the first 3 seconds before someone scrolls past your
That's
piece?
it. That's exactly right. So we need to keep this moving.
All right.
And this is all editable. So right now we could just, if I select those endpoints, I could say align them to the left, reset it to where we were, hit Skew, choose Skew again. We'll just do a sort of a nice quick one. Whoops, get it at the bottom, and then one thing, a nice little interface trick to be aware of is that if I zoom in a little bit, you can press the numbers, no modifiers, but if I wanted to zoom in here to 2 seconds, I just press 2 on the keyboard, and now it's showing me from 0 seconds to 2 seconds on the keyboard. I'll hit 3 seconds so that I can see a little bit more. If I select my endpoints and then skew it, it's currently those endpoints are snapping to the frames. So this is 25 frames per second, and so it's going snap, snap, snap every time, which is why it looks a little bit jaggy. I don't know if you can see between 11 and 12 there's a bit of a gap because it's tried to snap them.
You can see this. You can see it a lot when you move it forward and back. You can see that they're jumping.
Exactly.
So
if I hold down the control key, it basically says, just ignore these.
Just put it wherever.
And so that might be what you want. I quite like this just because aesthetically it's pleasing to me. It might not be quite the right way to do it, but I think it looks cool, so I'm going to do it. And when I let go, you can see that they've all beautifully offset in time. So when I press play, you've got this nice fading in effect.
Awesome.
Cool.
Hey, while we're going through there, we're about halfway through. So if anyone has any questions as we're going along, please don't hesitate to throw them in. We will continue moving through. There was a question asking if you're a motion designer. Would you consider yourself a motion designer or like a digital jack of all trades?
Probably the latter, I'd say.
Yeah.
I do motion design, but certainly I'm not. When you compare me to some of the, someone working at Buck or somewhere like that, I would say no, I'm not a motion designer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a spectrum.
Yeah. Absolutely.
So now we could do. Let's add rotation into the mix. So I'm going to press the R key, get the rotation property up here. It's more or less the same kind of thing. So we'll use, again, I'm going to type linear. I already remember from over here my so time, Tmin, Tmax, value 1, value 2. So we'll start by saying linear. I'm going to plug time in there again. I'm going to put endpoint, and then we'll put endpoint +2. But this time, I don't want it to go from 0 to 100, because all that would do, because we're talking about a different property, so it would start the rotation at 0, and then it would end rotated through 100 degrees. So we could say I want it to start at -90 degrees, and I want it to finish at 0. So let's just play it from there, and we'll see what happens. So there's one curve rotating through 90 degrees over 2 seconds. So I'll just solo that so you can see it a little bit more clearly. So it's fading in as well. Right. It's not looking super great because I've used the linear. The cool thing is I can just swap that out to ease out. And now when I play that back, it will actually glide into place in a much more satisfying way. Is that easy to see the difference?
It's not super easy, but I get the concept. So it's easing. It's a slow, so it's not snapping into position like mechanically.
Correct.
It's kind of got a bit more of a natural or organic kind of feel to it.
That's right. And so if I put them, I can put one side, I can put it side by side, so it's a bit easier to see. So the one on the right is the one that has a linear, so no easing on it. And the one on the left does have the easing. So when I play those back to side by side, you can see that the one in the center comes to a nice satisfying, glides to a nice halt, whereas the one on the right, it just goes and stops all of a sudden, just
right,
and looks unpleasant and bad. So
which is one of those like motion design animation like cardinal rules, right? Like it's the, it needs to be as natural, like the ball bouncing, like things easing in and stopping, because nothing in the natural world just stops.
Everything
even if it hits something, it's still got a slight delay.
That's exactly right. It feels completely unnatural if there's no easing on it, no acceleration or deceleration, it looks totally fake and just unpleasant, because we're not used to seeing things behave like that. Everything has inertia and everything has momentum and everything has kind of a pleasing physics to it, which you need to try to replicate if you can.
Yeah. Cool.
So all I needed to do there to kind of get that nicer looking physics there was change it from linear to ease out. And you can actually there is, I won't go into it now, but with Ease and Whiz, which is the little plugin that I made for After Effects, you can actually just grab straight out of here. For example, go to Expo Out. You can use there's a curve that we could use. You could use that instead of the built-in ease out in After Effects, and then get much more dramatic easing as well. So that's a possibility. It's a little bit out of scope for today, but if people were like, please show us how to do that, then I would be more than happy to.
Cool.
So again, I'll just hit the Command C on rotation. I'm just going to select all, press paste, and you can already see that we've got something pretty wild starting to happen. So now when that finishes rendering, I'll just bring that up a little bit bigger.
Oh, that's great. That definitely makes it easy to see once it's rendered out. Hey, look at that.
Yeah. So there's coming into shape quite nicely. Now, one of the sort of cardinal rules of programming and this kind of expression-based experimentation is you don't want to hard code values in your code, because if I was to, we kind of have been getting around it by copying, going select all, copy paste, but that's not good practice, because it means that you'd have to do that for every single layer, and it gets repetitive really quickly, and it's not fun to maintain. So what we can do, because we're going to be good little After Effects programmers here, is we'll take these numbers out and put them somewhere that is central, where they can all access the same numbers, which makes it very easy for us to then tweak and play around with the parameters. And I've probably made it sound more confusing than it is, but all I need to do is I'm going to make you can make an adjustment layer, but I always make a null. So that's just Command Option Shift Y, and I'll call this control. And that layer it won't render. It's literally just there for us to put our little parameters on. So I'll go up to the effect.
So that's what a null is for. That's what you would do it for. It's just something to.
Yeah. There's a null. Nulls are extremely useful, and I'll show you one more usage of nulls in a minute once we've got through the sort of externalizing those parameters.
Okay.
Never
Cool.
woke up this morning thinking I was going to be saying externalize these parameters, but here we are. And so
It's a cool band name.
yeah, exactly. But nulls are just like little helper layers. They exist in relation to everything else, and they are great. Nulls are your friend. So with this control layer, I'm going to go to the effect menu. And if you've been around After Effects for a while, but you haven't gotten into expressions too much, you might have seen this expression controls category and wondered what that was all about. Well, you can choose one of these, and all it does, we're going to use slide control, and it just puts a slider like this. So it's not connected to anything. Like, it literally does nothing at the moment, but we're going to wire it up. And that's the purpose of those expression controls, is so that you can make sort of like a rigging external way to control your code, if you like. So we'll give this a name. We're going to call that rotation amount. I won't put a space in there because it's kind of just coding convention. And now in one of these expressions, the one at the bottom, because that's the one that is we can see at the moment, I'm just going to write again rotation amount. So this is going to be our variable, and a variable is just like, in coding terms, it's like a little place where you can store something, where you can just store it and then refer to it. So I'm going to say the rotation amount equals, and now I will need to refer to this little controller that we've got up there. Fortunately, the clever folk at Adobe have given you this. Some people call it a snail. I think I call it a pick whip. Expression pick whip. Pick whip. If I click and drag from there and let go on the slider, it types all of this in for me, so I don't have to type it, which is just wonderful.
I didn't realize you could use the pick whip for things outside of the timeline. I always saw it as people kind of connecting things to a timeline, kind of making a parent kind of situation happening, or group, or however the terminology goes. But I didn't realize, you could just put it over there. Interesting.
Yeah, nifty, right?
Nice.
So it's just it saves you a lot of typing. So you can just type in that little bit equals, and then all it's doing is it's kind of a way for After Effects to know what you're referring to. So in this composition on the layer called control, there's an effect called rotation amount, which has a slider value. So now rotation amount, our variable, will contain the value of this slider. Right now it's set to 0, but we'll change that in a second. I'm just going to double click rotation amount, copy. And that was this one here, -90. That is the one that we need to update. So I'm just going to type in rotation amount up there. Now you can already see one of them has changed, because it's got the rotation amount 0. If I change that to -90, it'll look identical. But now if I hit rotation, I'm going to select all of these green squiggle layers and hit paste. Nothing appears to change, but when I go up here and change the rotation amount, you can see I can actually affect how much we want these things to rotate and which direction.
Cool.
Similarly, that's pretty wild sort of effect. I quite dig that. So that's minus 486. Maybe that's a bit much, actually. I don't want to go crazy. Let's go. There we go. Minus 159. So you can see that's a much more natural and organic way to play around with the values than typing them into code. You get to actually sort of see in real time how much you're affecting it. You can even keyframe that value if you're going to be like really crazy. You could have it start over here at start it at 250 degrees, put a keyframe in there, and then say over here the rotation amount is at 0. So now when I press and play it back, it's going to sort of start out with a big rotation and then end up with no rotation. And you can change the amount of timing on that as well. So maybe that's the kind of effect that you're looking for. But the important thing to realize is that by using those expression controls up here on a null layer, you get to take them out of your code, and then they all of those little bits of JavaScript get to refer back to one value rather than having to replicate that value on every single layer. And you can even talk to different layers in different comps as well. So you might have one comp which has a whole bunch of layers that control things throughout your entire After Effects project. But
Oh, wow.
that might be a lesson for another day.
It might be a lesson for another day, but I get what you mean. So yeah, you could create those controls in just a single comp, and then creating all these different, like maybe you wanted to do 10 sort of similar but different, things for a brand or a company, or whatever it is, you're doing some overlays or something like that, but you've created that repository that you reference, that you've built, and then you could potentially tweak it along the way and make different variables, different variations.
Yeah, it's really powerful.
That's pretty wild.
Yeah, there's some really cool. If you've got the sort of time and energy, and if it's going to be worthwhile, you can set up some amazingly elaborate rigs so that there might be a pop-up menu that lets you choose the entire color scheme for your comp. Like duplicate a comp, choose a color scheme, and you're away. So that way, if you were a brand guardian or an agency and you were sending out After Effects comps to everybody, you wanted to make sure they were using the correct brand colors, you could just code them all and then just let them sort of like expose just enough that they can change it, but not go off the rails and start creating something brand new, which is
that's
good.
Cool.
So the other kind of hard-coded thing that we've got in there is our duration. So we just put it at 2 seconds over there, and that was on the rotation property and on the opacity property. So very quickly, I'll go back to the control null at the top. I'm going to duplicate that one. I'm going to call it duration. I'll just call it duration number. Doesn't really make sense, but we'll call it duration number. And we said it was at 2 seconds, so I can just change that to 1 second up here. Now, that hasn't changed anything because we actually need to put it into our code. I'm going to call it duration amount. I don't want to call it just duration because that's a reserved keyword. So we'll call it duration amount just so that it doesn't clash with an existing keyword in there. Use that pick whip to go up to the slider like we did before. You can see here they look almost identical, but under effect, that one's rotation amount, this one's duration number. And now my terminology, I've kind of called it number there and amount there, but that's fine. We'll kind of paste that in there instead of that number 2. That's for rotation. This one, same kind of deal. I can just grab that line duration amount. I want to bring it into this expression, and we're on the opacity property now. Same kind of deal. Paste it in there, and then get rotation and opacity. Command C, select all of the green squiggles and press paste. And now you can see that this should now only take 1 second to animate in. So it's nice and quick. And if I wanted to make it much slower, all I need to do is go up to control. I can say change that to 4 seconds. Now the whole thing will take 4 seconds. So a beautiful organic shape that fades in over 4 seconds.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you can just so easily like change it around till it feels about right. And obviously, as you're adding features and getting a little bit more complicated down the line, you set yourself up that you're like, oh, now I probably need to slow it down because it's getting a bit busy, or you need more time to take it in. You just change a number really easily.
Yeah, it just gives you that much more flexibility, and lets you play around like with the at a higher level, lets you play around to just tweak it and get the result that you're after, and lets you experiment and have some fun with it as well, which is super important, as you know. So the one last one that we'll add to this before I sort of consider that we've got it more or less right will just be the scale. And the reason that I want to call up the scale as a property to look at is because the scale has 2 numbers. So before we were looking at rotation and opacity, and those are all well and good, but with the scale is two numbers. So how would we go about that? I'm just going to copy the expression for rotation, and I'll paste it in with scale. And I don't even going to change rotation amount. It doesn't really matter for the moment. And it comes up with an error. It's like, oh, I don't like that. Actually, you know what? I'll copy the one for opacity instead, because that might be a little bit more similar. So it comes up with an error. If I click that and it says, what are you complaining about? Expression result.
I'd love it. I'd love it if there was just like a different version of After Effects where you could get like a really snarky like dialogue boxes come up that was exactly what you were talking about. Like, what are you doing? What are you doing, mate? What are you trying to do? It doesn't make any sense. Rather than like this very nice kind of, hey, I see you're trying to do something here.
I'm sure it won't be too far away with AI. You'll be able to get, choose your personality, whether it's like like you said, really snarky one. After Effects 2033, you'll be able to choose the personality of After Effects. So it's complaining because the expression result must be of dimension 2, not 1. And that is what we were talking about here, where scale needs a width and a height ratio for it. So right now, all we're doing is we're giving it one number. So that linear expression is spitting out one number. So otherwise, it would be quite more or less the same. So we're you could say it's scaling from 0 to 100. So what we'll do is we use a little temporary variable here. We're going to just say s equals, put a colon on the end of that line so that JavaScript knows that that's the end of the statement. And then the way to do more than one value in JavaScript is type a square bracket s, comma s. So that's just going to be the same number twice. So it's like whatever that number was, I'm just going to feed it in here too. So the first s will go into that, the first value. The second s will become that value. So now if I hit, there we go, you can might just be able to see that little, I've only done it to the one in the very middle, but you can see it's just scaling up like a little egg in the middle. And so now if I apply, maybe we won't do it from 0 to 100, but maybe do it from, say, 50 to 100. Select the scale property, hit Command C, select all the green squiggle layers and hit Command V. And now we ought to see it's actually scaling up as well as rotating and fading in.
That's very cool. What's the 50 referencing in that scale? Just when you went straight to 50, I was thinking that seems like a big jump. So what are we actually talking about?
Sorry, that's me trying to go too quickly. So here, again, if we kind of come back to what this actually means, it's like at the time is the part that changes every frame. The endpoint is like where we begin, and the second one, endpoint plus duration amount, is like where we want our animation to end. 50 is like where it should start, and 100 is where it should end. So it's basically saying, I want you to start scaling at 50%.
50%, okay.
Yep. So if I go to the beginning of this layer, it says 50, 50, 50. And then after 2 seconds, it's gone to 100. So that's all that refers to. So it's basically saying, I don't want you to start at 0, but I want you to start at 50, just so that it's not quite so dramatic. If I change that to 0, then it would start at 0, and then you can see the difference there. So it's actually coming in from a smaller little point and then getting bigger over time. And that is, which might be what you're after. So, but that's a kind of, there we go. So now it is scaling from 0 and getting to 100 over 2 seconds.
Cool. Makes sense.
Yeah. So that's all well and good. Now, if there's time, what I'd love to show you is how to do that.
Yeah, we've got about 5 minutes.
Cool. All right. We'll race through. Hopefully it won't be too confusing. But what we've done there is it starts, but it doesn't end. Like at the end of the layer, wouldn't it be great if it sort of undid what we'd just done? So it did the same thing, but in reverse. So there's there's a way to do that again in the same expression. So we'll just do it with opacity first of all. I call up my opacity expression here. So we know that it's coming in, starting at the endpoint and then endpoint plus duration, and it goes from 0 to 100. So that's all cool. That's like what we saw over here on this one. But now what we want it to do is at the out point minus 1, or whatever the duration is, I want you to start doing the same thing in reverse. So this is the fade out section. So to go from this one to this one is fade in. To go from out point minus 1 to the out point is going to be the fade out. And we went from 0 to 100 on the opacity, and now we want to go from 100 back to 0. So very quickly, if we start here, we're going to call this one A, just for no other reason than that's easy to remember. That's going to be our beginning, and then we'll do the same thing in reverse. So, but this time, referring to our little chart, we want to start at out point minus 1, and we want to finish at out point. So starting at out point minus, well, we'll call it duration amount, because we put it on our little slider thing. And we're going to start at, this is going to be a little bit confusing, but what I'm going to do is add those two values together. So because we went from 0 to 100, to get back to 0, we need to subtract 100. So we're going to go from 0 to minus 100.
Right.
Then add A and B. Now, let's solo that layer by itself so that we can sort of see what's going on. So hopefully, if I've done it right, and I just need to make that duration a little bit shorter, because right now it's going to be 1 second. And so now, of course it doesn't work, because there's a typo. It's supposed to be a comma, not a
This
dot.
is where you need Clippy.
It looks like you're trying to do Adobe Live. Would you like me to help? Outpoint minus duration amount. Oh yeah, and then it's basically to go to outpoint. There we go. It's just a typo. Now it goes fades in and then fades out. So the beauty of that is, once you've got that on all of your layers, and similarly, I won't. Trying to think if I've got enough time to do it on another one. So I'll do the same thing on rotation as well. So add that in there. B is going to be, and I realize this might be a little bit too quick to really get stuck into, but hopefully if anyone is following along, then it will make sense with that diagram that I did before. And rotation amount. Minus, start with 0 and then end with that amount. Okay, so then add, it'd be a miracle if this works first time. So now I've got,
so it's a lot to type. It's a lot to get right.
Yeah, and I think once there's a little bit of there's definitely sort of bit of experience, and there's a lot of trial and error. And I think for a lot of people, myself included, you sort of start by just working with what other people have done and just figuring out, like, just copying and pasting, really, and just sort of saying, like, oh yeah, I can see what they've done here. I can see that that's working. So what we've done by using the code to get the beginning of the layer and then at the end of the layer and then adding them together. Now, when I play it back, you get the intro and the outro with no keyframes. So you can see, now you can play around with, because there are no keyframes, you can play around with Skew and get some cool effects happening, sort of, like get the beginning of the layers to do one thing, get the outro to do something else entirely. And then you can get some very sort of, weird and wonderful effects that would actually be, in some instances, quite difficult to do with keyframes, because this technique actually lets you sort of overlap keyframes, which you wouldn't actually be able to do with keyframes, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, you'd have to like redo the keyframes, right?
You'd have to redo them. And so this way you've got this so much flexibility in terms of, you know, using a tool like Skew to sequence the layers, play around, so you can see that, you know, you change the beginning of the whole thing, change the end of it, and even when there's a layer that is not, like, there's less than 1 second between this in and out layer, it just basically means it won't reach 100. And because there's
hey Ian, actually we are going to get cut off if we don't say our goodbyes right now, so we will be back on Thursday. So if there's any questions or anything like that, we'll pick up where we left off, and we've got some more fun stuff for you on in 2 days. So we'll see you then.
I got carried away.
That was great. Thanks, Ian. We'll see you in 2 days.
Thanks so much. See you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Catch you next one.